Picture this. Bill Gates has donated over $50 billion to charity, yet his net worth has tripled since he began his philanthropic crusade. Warren Buffett has pledged $37 billion to various causes, but somehow his fortune continues to grow exponentially. Mark Zuckerberg made headlines by promising to give away 99% of his Facebook shares, yet he hasn't lost a single penny of actual wealth. This isn't generosity. This is the most sophisticated wealth preservation and reputation laundering scheme in human history, masquerading as altruism. And every time you see these headlines celebrating their charitable giving, you're witnessing a masterclass in psychological manipulation that would make Machiavelli himself applaud. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. While these billionaires receive tax breaks worth billions for their charitable donations, you're paying higher taxes to compensate for their avoided obligations. Every dollar they don't pay in taxes is a dollar that comes out of public education, healthcare, and infrastructure that you depend on. They've essentially created a system where they get praised for generosity while transferring their tax burden directly onto your shoulders. Today we're going to dissect the anatomy of modern philanthropy and reveal how the world's wealthiest individuals have weaponized charity to avoid taxes, control global policy, and maintain their stranglehold on power while convincing the masses that they're heroes. We'll examine specific case studies, legal documents, and psychological research that exposes this manipulation in devastating detail. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand why every major philanthropic announcement is actually a calculated move in a global chess game where billionaires are consolidating power while appearing virtuous. You'll never look at a charity gala or philanthropic announcement the same way again. But before we dive into this rabbit hole of financial engineering and social manipulation, I need you to understand something crucial. What I'm about to show you isn't conspiracy theory. It's documented fact, hidden in plain sight within legal filings, tax codes, and academic research that the mainstream media conveniently ignores. The evidence is overwhelming, and it's been deliberately obscured by the very people who benefit from this system. If you're ready to see how deep this deception goes, hit that subscribe button now because this channel is dedicated to exposing the dark psychology behind wealth and power that others are afraid to discuss. We're going to pull back the curtain on the most sophisticated con game in human history. Let's begin with a fundamental question that should disturb anyone with basic mathematical literacy. How does someone who claims to give away billions of dollars consistently become wealthier? The answer lies in understanding the sophisticated legal architecture that surrounds modern philanthropy, and it's far more complex and sinister than most people realize. When Bill Gates donates money to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, he isn't actually giving his money away. He's transferring assets from one entity he controls to another entity he controls, with the crucial difference being that the second entity pays zero taxes while maintaining his complete operational authority over those funds. This is essentially moving money from his right pocket to his left pocket, except the left pocket is legally invisible to tax authorities. Consider the psychological brilliance of this maneuver. Gates receives immediate tax deductions for his charitable contributions, often saving hundreds of millions in taxes annually. In 2019 alone, Gates claimed over $2 billion in charitable deductions, saving him approximately $800 million in taxes that would have gone to public services. Meanwhile, the foundation invests these funds in the same markets where Gates maintains his other investments, generating returns that often exceed the amounts he initially donated. The foundation then uses a small percentage of these returns for actual charitable work while reinvesting the majority, creating a perpetual wealth generation machine that operates tax-free. Federal law requires private foundations to distribute only 5% of their assets annually, meaning 95% can remain invested indefinitely, growing without any tax burden. Let's examine the numbers more closely. The Gates Foundation has assets of approximately $65 billion. They're required to distribute only $3.25 billion annually, while the remaining assets generate returns averaging 7 to 10% per year. This means the foundation generates $4 to $6 billion annually in investment returns while only spending $3.25 billion on charitable activities. The foundation actually grows wealthier each year while appearing to give money away. This isn't charity in any meaningful sense of the word. It's a sophisticated shell game where wealth is shuffled between different legal entities while maintaining centralized control and maximizing tax advantages. The psychological impact on public perception, however, is profound. Every news story about Gates's charitable giving reinforces a narrative of selfless generosity that obscures the underlying financial engineering. The neuroscience behind this manipulation is particularly insidious. When we observe acts of apparent generosity, our brains release oxytocin, often called the trust hormone. This neurochemical response creates positive associations with the individual performing the generous act, effectively disabling our critical thinking about their other activities. Gates understands this psychological vulnerability and exploits it systematically through carefully timed announcements and media appearances. Research from Stanford University demonstrates that exposure to philanthropic messaging actually reduces people's support for progressive taxation and wealth redistribution policies. The mere existence of billionaire charity convinces people that extreme wealth concentration isn't problematic because the wealthy will voluntarily address social issues. This is psychological manipulation on a massive scale. To understand how philanthropy functions as a wealth laundering mechanism, we need to examine specific cases where the mask has slipped and the true nature of these operations has been exposed. The legal framework that makes this possible is complex, but the underlying principle is simple: create the appearance of charitable giving while maintaining complete control over the funds and maximizing personal benefit. Let's start with a case that received minimal media attention but reveals the entire playbook. The Modest Needs Foundation, established by Keith Taylor, was supposed to help families in financial crisis. Over several years, Taylor diverted $2.5 million from the foundation to fund his luxury lifestyle, including a Manhattan apartment worth $4,000 per month and restaurant bills exceeding $1,000 per meal. When investigators examined Taylor's operation, they discovered he had simply copied, in amateur fashion, the same techniques used by billionaire foundations. The only difference was scale and legal sophistication. Taylor's mistake wasn't the fundamental approach, it was being too obvious about it. The Cancer Fund of America provides an even more revealing example. This organization raised $187 million ostensibly to fight cancer. Less than 3% of that money ever reached cancer patients or research. The remaining 97% went to administrative expenses, which included luxury travel, expensive cars, and salaries for family members who performed no meaningful work. Federal investigators found that the organization's leaders used sophisticated accounting methods to hide their personal enrichment while maintaining the legal appearance of charitable activity. They employed the same trust structures, investment vehicles, and administrative frameworks used by major billionaire foundations, just with less sophisticated legal protection. But here's what the mainstream media won't tell you: these cases aren't aberrations. They're simply less sophisticated versions of what happens at the highest levels of philanthropy. The difference between Keith Taylor and Bill Gates isn't moral, it's the quality of their legal teams and the sophistication of their wealth management strategies. The Walton Family Foundation, established by the heirs to the Walmart fortune, provides a perfect example of how this works at the billionaire level. With assets exceeding $5 billion, the foundation is praised for its educational philanthropy. However, detailed analysis reveals that much of their giving supports charter school initiatives that undermine public education while creating new markets for private educational companies. Many of these educational companies have direct or indirect financial connections to other Walton family investments. The foundation essentially uses tax-deductible charitable giving to create markets for their for-profit investments while appearing to support education. They're simultaneously destroying public education and profiting from its replacement with privatized alternatives. The psychological impact of this approach is devastating for public discourse. When critics point out that Walmart's labor practices create the very poverty that their foundation claims to address, they're dismissed as attacking charity rather than challenging a coherent wealth extraction and control strategy. Jeff Bezos provides another instructive case study. His Bezos Earth Fund, announced with great fanfare as a $10 billion commitment to fighting climate change, operates as a private foundation that allows him to direct climate policy while maintaining complete control over the funds. The announcement generated massive positive publicity at a time when Amazon faced increasing criticism for its environmental impact. Meanwhile, Amazon continues to be one of the world's largest carbon emitters, and the Earth Fund's actual spending focuses primarily on technological solutions that benefit Amazon's business interests rather than systemic changes that would reduce emissions. Bezos is essentially using charitable giving to shape climate policy in ways that benefit his business while appearing to be an environmental leader. If you're starting to see the pattern here, and you're feeling that uncomfortable realization that you've been manipulated by these carefully crafted narratives, I want you to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. Have you ever questioned the motivations behind high-profile charitable giving before? Your engagement helps this content reach more people who need to understand these mechanisms of control. The true power of philanthropic wealth laundering becomes apparent when we examine how these foundations influence global policy. This isn't about simple tax avoidance. It's about purchasing political influence on a scale that would be illegal if conducted through traditional lobbying channels. What we're witnessing is the emergence of a shadow global governance system operated by unelected billionaires. The Gates Foundation provides the most striking example of this phenomenon. As the second-largest funder of the World Health Organization, Gates wields more influence over global health policy than most sovereign nations. This influence isn't theoretical. It's documented in policy papers that directly reflect Gates Foundation priorities and methodologies, often word for word. Consider the psychological implications of this arrangement. An unelected individual, accountable to no democratic process, shapes health policies that affect billions of people worldwide. When the Gates Foundation funds malaria prevention programs, those programs must use Gates-approved methodologies and purchase supplies from Gates-approved vendors, many of which have financial connections to other Gates investments. The Foundation's influence extends far beyond health policy. Through strategic funding of educational initiatives, Gates has shaped curriculum standards in dozens of countries, promoting technological solutions that benefit Microsoft and other companies in his investment portfolio. Students worldwide are learning from educational materials that subtly promote Gates's business interests while appearing to be neutral charitable initiatives. This pattern of influence purchasing through philanthropy has deep historical roots. The Rockefeller Foundation pioneered this model over a century ago when John D. Rockefeller, widely reviled for his monopolistic business practices and exploitation of workers, used philanthropic giving to rehabilitate his public image while extending his influence into education, medicine, and social policy. The foundation funded the development of medical schools that emphasized pharmaceutical interventions over preventive care, creating markets for Rockefeller's chemical and pharmaceutical investments while establishing him as a benefactor of human health. This approach was so successful that it became the template for all subsequent billionaire philanthropy. What's particularly insidious about this historical precedent is how it reveals the long-term strategic thinking behind philanthropic manipulation. The initial investment in reputation laundering and policy influence generates returns across multiple generations, creating dynasties of power that operate outside traditional democratic constraints. The Rockefeller family's influence on global policy continues today through various foundation initiatives, nearly a century after John D. Rockefeller's death. This demonstrates how philanthropic structures can perpetuate oligarchic control indefinitely, passing power from generation to generation without any democratic oversight or accountability. The psychological sophistication of this approach cannot be overstated. By framing policy influence as charitable giving, these foundations neutralize potential opposition and create positive associations with what would otherwise be recognized as oligarchic control. When Gates influences education policy through his foundation, critics are dismissed as opposing charity rather than challenging undemocratic governance. The scale of this influence has expanded dramatically in recent decades. The combined assets of the top 10 private foundations exceed the GDP of most countries, yet they operate with minimal oversight and maximum flexibility in pursuing their founders' agendas. This represents a fundamental shift in global power structures, where wealth concentration has reached levels that allow individuals to function as shadow governments. Modern technology has amplified this influence exponentially. Digital platforms allow foundations to shape public opinion through sophisticated messaging campaigns that appear to be grassroots movements but are actually funded by billionaire interests. Social media algorithms amplify foundation-friendly content while suppressing critical analysis, creating echo chambers that reinforce philanthropic narratives. The COVID-19 pandemic provided a perfect case study of how this influence operates in practice. Gates Foundation funding shaped global pandemic response policies, promoting technological solutions and pharmaceutical interventions while discouraging approaches that might threaten pharmaceutical industry profits. The foundation's influence was so pervasive that alternative approaches were dismissed as unscientific, even when they had strong evidence supporting their effectiveness. The most insidious aspect of philanthropic manipulation lies in its psychological impact on public perception and political discourse. This isn't merely about avoiding taxes or gaining influence. It's about fundamentally altering how society views wealth concentration and inequality through sophisticated psychological warfare techniques. When we see billionaires engaged in charitable giving, our cognitive biases work against our rational analysis of their overall impact on society. The availability heuristic causes us to overweight visible charitable acts while underweighting less visible but more significant activities like tax avoidance, labor exploitation, and market manipulation. This cognitive vulnerability is exploited systematically through carefully orchestrated media campaigns that emphasize philanthropic giving while minimizing coverage of wealth extraction mechanisms. Research from Harvard Business School demonstrates that exposure to philanthropic messaging reduces people's support for wealth taxes by an average of 15%. The mere existence of billionaire charity convinces people that extreme wealth concentration isn't problematic because the wealthy will voluntarily address social issues. This is psychological manipulation designed to neutralize political opposition to inequality. The psychological concept of moral licensing provides another layer of understanding. Research demonstrates that individuals who perform or observe moral acts subsequently feel licensed to engage in less moral behavior. When billionaires establish their moral credentials through charitable giving, both they and their observers become less critical of their other activities. Gates's philanthropic reputation provides psychological cover for Microsoft's continued monopolistic practices and aggressive tax avoidance strategies. This dynamic extends beyond individual psychology to shape broader social and political narratives. The existence of billionaire philanthropy is frequently cited as evidence that extreme wealth concentration isn't problematic because the wealthy voluntarily redistribute their resources. This argument ignores the fundamental issue of democratic accountability and the concentration of decision-making power in unelected hands. The media plays a crucial role in perpetuating these narratives through what researchers call philanthropy washing. Philanthropic announcements generate positive coverage that reinforces public perception of billionaire generosity while investigations into the structural impacts of wealth concentration receive minimal attention. This asymmetry in coverage isn't accidental. It reflects the influence that wealthy individuals and their foundations wield over media organizations through advertising, donations, and board positions. Major news organizations receive millions of dollars in foundation funding, creating conflicts of interest that shape editorial decisions. When the Gates Foundation funds health reporting at major newspapers, those publications become less likely to publish critical analysis of foundation activities. This creates a media environment where philanthropic narratives dominate while critical perspectives are marginalized. The educational system further reinforces these narratives by teaching simplified versions of philanthropic history that emphasize the positive outcomes of charitable giving while ignoring the broader context of wealth extraction and political influence. Students learn about Carnegie's libraries and Rockefeller's universities without understanding how these philanthropic gestures serve to legitimize massive wealth concentration and undemocratic power structures. University research is similarly compromised by foundation funding. Academic departments that receive billionaire philanthropy become less likely to produce research that challenges wealth concentration or questions philanthropic motivations. This creates an intellectual environment where critical analysis of philanthropy is discouraged while supportive research is rewarded. The psychological impact of this comprehensive narrative control is profound. Multiple generations have been conditioned to view billionaire philanthropy as evidence of virtue rather than strategy. This conditioning makes it extremely difficult for people to recognize the manipulative aspects of charitable giving, even when presented with clear evidence. Social media amplifies these psychological effects through algorithmic systems that promote content supporting philanthropic narratives while suppressing critical analysis. Foundation-funded organizations create sophisticated digital campaigns that appear to be grassroots movements but are actually coordinated efforts to shape public opinion in favor of billionaire interests. The result is a psychological landscape where questioning billionaire philanthropy feels morally wrong to most people. This emotional conditioning serves as a powerful defense mechanism against rational analysis of wealth concentration and its impacts on democratic governance. The ultimate cost of philanthropic manipulation extends far beyond tax revenue lost to foundation structures. It represents a fundamental undermining of democratic governance and social solidarity that has profound implications for society's future development. We're witnessing the emergence of a neo-feudal system where billionaire philanthropists function as unelected lords making decisions for the masses. When billionaires use foundations to influence policy, they're essentially privatizing decisions that should be made through democratic processes. This privatization occurs without public debate or accountability, creating a shadow governance system that operates parallel to elected institutions. The psychological impact of this arrangement is to normalize oligarchic control while maintaining the appearance of democratic legitimacy. Consider the scale of this democratic deficit. The Gates Foundation alone influences health policy in over 100 countries, educational standards in dozens of nations, and agricultural practices across multiple continents. These decisions affect billions of people who have no voice in foundation governance and no mechanism for holding foundation leaders accountable for their choices. The economic implications are equally significant and far more complex than simple tax avoidance. Foundation structures allow wealth to compound indefinitely while avoiding the taxation that would otherwise redistribute resources through democratic institutions. This creates a feedback loop where wealth concentration increases over time, generating ever greater political influence that can be used to maintain and expand the systems that enable further concentration. Analysis of foundation investment strategies reveals another layer of this economic manipulation. Foundations typically invest their assets in the same markets and companies that generate wealth for their founders. The Gates Foundation holds significant investments in pharmaceutical companies that benefit from foundation health initiatives. The Walton Foundation invests in educational technology companies that profit from the charter school movement it promotes. This creates a system where charitable giving generates direct financial returns for the givers while appearing to be altruistic. Foundations essentially use tax-deductible donations to subsidize investments that benefit their founders' other business interests. The charitable sector becomes a mechanism for wealth extraction rather than wealth redistribution. The social costs include the erosion of public institutions and collective problem-solving capacity. When wealthy individuals fund private solutions to public problems, they undermine support for public alternatives while ensuring that solutions reflect their personal priorities rather than democratic consensus. This dynamic weakens social solidarity and reduces society's capacity for collective action. Public education provides a clear example of this erosion. Billionaire education philanthropy consistently promotes privatization initiatives that weaken public schools while creating markets for private educational services. The result is a two-tiered system where wealthy families access high-quality private education while public education deteriorates, increasing inequality across generations. Healthcare demonstrates similar patterns. Foundation health initiatives focus on technological solutions and pharmaceutical interventions that benefit foundation investors while neglecting systemic approaches like public health infrastructure or preventive care that might be more effective but less profitable. The environmental movement has been similarly captured by billionaire philanthropy. Major environmental organizations receive significant foundation funding that shapes their priorities toward technological solutions and market-based approaches rather than systemic changes that might threaten billionaire interests. Climate activism becomes channeled into directions that benefit foundation funders rather than maximizing environmental protection. Perhaps most importantly, philanthropic manipulation shapes public discourse about inequality and wealth concentration in ways that serve elite interests. By framing charitable giving as evidence of billionaire virtue, these narratives deflect attention from the structural changes needed to address inequality and concentrate power in fewer hands. The psychological impact of this discourse manipulation is to make people feel grateful for billionaire charity rather than angry about the wealth extraction that makes charity necessary. This emotional misdirection prevents the development of political movements that might challenge wealth concentration or demand democratic accountability for economic policy. Research demonstrates that societies with higher levels of billionaire philanthropy actually have higher levels of inequality and lower levels of social mobility. This correlation suggests that philanthropy serves to legitimize and perpetuate inequality rather than address it. The charitable sector becomes a pressure release valve that prevents more fundamental challenges to oligarchic power. The next time you see a headline celebrating billionaire philanthropy, remember what you've learned today. You're not witnessing generosity, you're observing the most sophisticated wealth preservation and influence purchasing system in human history, disguised as charity. Every philanthropic announcement is a calculated move in a global chess game where billionaires are consolidating power while appearing virtuous. The psychological manipulation involved in this system is profound and systematic. It exploits our natural positive responses to apparent generosity while obscuring the mechanisms of wealth extraction and political control that operate behind the philanthropic facade. We've been conditioned to feel grateful for charity rather than angry about the wealth concentration that makes charity necessary. The evidence we've examined today reveals a comprehensive system of democratic subversion operating through charitable structures. Billionaire foundations function as shadow governments, making policy decisions that affect billions of people without any democratic accountability or oversight. This represents one of the greatest threats to democratic governance in modern history. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for anyone who wants to think critically about wealth, power, and social change in the modern world. The Philanthropic Industrial Complex represents one of the most significant threats to democratic governance and social equality, Yet it operates largely without public scrutiny or accountability because it has successfully manipulated public perception to view criticism of charity as morally wrong. The scale of this manipulation is staggering. Trillions of dollars flow through foundation structures that serve billionaire interests while appearing to serve public good. Democratic institutions are systematically undermined while oligarchic control expands under the cover of charitable giving. Future generations will inherit a world where unelected billionaires wield more power than elected governments. But awareness is the first step toward resistance. Once you understand how philanthropic manipulation works, you can't unsee it. Every charitable announcement becomes transparent in its strategic motivations. Every foundation initiative reveals its underlying agenda. Every philanthropic narrative exposes its psychological manipulation techniques. If this investigation has opened your eyes to the reality behind philanthropic manipulation, I need you to take action. Like this video to help it reach more people who need to understand these mechanisms of control. The algorithms that govern social media are designed to suppress content that challenges billionaire interests, so your engagement is crucial for overcoming that suppression. Share this video with anyone who still believes that billionaire charity represents genuine generosity rather than sophisticated manipulation. Most people have never been exposed to this level of analysis about philanthropic structures, and they need to understand how they're being manipulated before they can resist that manipulation. And if you want to continue exploring the dark psychology of wealth and power, subscribe to this channel and hit the notification bell. Next week, we'll be examining how inherited wealth creates invisible advantages that perpetuate inequality across generations, revealing another layer of the system that keeps the wealthy in power while convincing everyone else that success is simply a matter of individual merit. The truth about wealth and power is darker and more complex than most people realize. But understanding that truth is the first step toward creating a more just and democratic society. The billionaire class has spent decades perfecting these manipulation techniques, but their power depends on our ignorance. Knowledge is our weapon against oligarchic control. Thank you for joining me in this investigation, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue exposing the mechanisms that maintain elite power in modern society.